Hello to everybody. This is our first leadership Q&A webinar that we're doing in Slido. We're covering this topic today for the first time. And this is also our first webinar of the fall season, so yay! Happy to have you with us. And we are super excited for this topic. As you may be noticed, the session recording is already running, so no need to take notes. Sit back, relax, focus on what's happening. We are going to send out a recording of this session, the slide deck, and some additional resources after this webinar, so no need to take notes. And here with you today, some of you may know them, for others it's the first time, are our head of people, Kati Gabova, and Pali Dudrik, the general manager of Slido. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, thank you for having us, Sabina.
Of course, super excited. Okay, you will see more of these two beautiful people later. And my name is Sabina, by the way. I am an education manager at Slido, and I also frequently facilitate our leadership Q&A sessions. So I feel like we're a good team. Hopefully we are equipped to answer many of your questions. We have prepared some cool content for you today, but the content is only as great as you are interested in it. So please share with us your expectations of today. What are you most excited to learn? And if there's something in that multiple choice poll that doesn't actually fit you at all, please let us know what it is in the other question, which is an open text. If you have trouble to find Slido, you can either find it in the right-hand side in the sidebar of your WebEx, or if that doesn't pop up for any reason, you can always take your phone, scan the QR code that you see right now on the left of the screen. Alternatively, you can also open another browser window and go to slido.com and type in the event code transparent. Amazing. So at the moment, how to increase audience engagement is in the lead, followed by how to prepare leaders for Q&A and how to increase trust in the organization. Amazing. How to increase transparency, and so far, nobody for the tech how-to. I'm shocked. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expectations for today. Obviously, how to increase audience engagement in a Q&A is in the lead. We will also talk about that a little bit more towards the end. How to prepare leaders for Q&A and how to increase trust in an organization. Those are our main points of today. And if at some point you're wondering, oh, but this tech is so cool, like Slido is really awesome for Q&A, and I don't actually see how they do it because it's so magical, then I would like to clarify that we are going to have a webinar dedicated to the technical ins and outs of Slido next Tuesday at the same time. And there, my colleagues will teach you how to use Slido Q&A like a pro, so don't miss it. You can sign up now. The link has been posted in the chat just now, I think, but we'll also include a registration the registration link in the output email, so don't worry. And by the way, if you cannot make it live, but that session sounds very interesting to you, you can still register to receive the recording and the output slides. So just sign up. All right. But for today, here's a quick look at our agenda. We'll first look at how Q&A can help leaders to build trust before we dive deeper into what a great Q&A session looks like and how to navigate it as a leader during our expert interview with Kati and Pali. At the end, we'll do a summary of their top tips and our recap, and we will give a few suggestions on how to facilitate a smooth Q&A before you'll have the chance to ask Pali and Kati more questions at the end. All right, so how can leaders increase trust in their organizations? That is the million-dollar question everybody wants to know. So as we all know, trust is a long game and it takes time to build and it can be lost quite easily, unfortunately, but the benefits are amazing as people in high trust companies report more energy at work, higher productivity, more engagement. You guys wanted to learn about engagement and less stress. Who wants that? Trick question. Everybody wants that. So how do we get there? There are, of course, many possible answers, but today we're focusing mostly on what leaders can do together with a little bit of tech support. So what do you think? How big is the impact of leadership behavior on creating an environment of trust at work? When you look at your company and you look at your leadership, would you say that, 1 star, that's negligible, they don't have an impact at all? Or would you say 5, it's actually fundamental, leaders have a huge influence? Let's see, we have 19 votes so far, popping up to 24. Amazing, amazing. Okay, so as we can see here, many of you also think that leaders have quite the impact on their company culture, and the research actually agrees with you. Paul Zak is a professor of neuroeconomics, and one of his specialties is the application of neuroscience on how to effectively build trust in companies. In his research, he found that many leaders understand the importance of trust, at least in principle, but most have done little to increase trust, mainly because they aren't sure where to start. Another million-dollar question. Where can leaders start? Luckily, Paul Zak didn't just stop there, but he also identified 8 measurable management behaviors that foster trust. I recommend checking all of them out. We are going to include an article in the output, but for the sake of time, we're focusing on 2 today. First of all, share information broadly. Why? Has something to do with stress. Uncertainty about a company's directions leads to stress, back-talking, rumors, confusion, which ultimately undermines teamwork. And it's better to share information regularly, publicly, and to make it easily accessible. Secondly, intentionally build relationships, because when people build relationships intentionally at work, their performance improves, and managers who are interested and they show concern for the well-being and success of their team usually outperform others in the quality and the quantity of their work. That's amazing, right? So now guess which tech tool can help leaders to do both of those things. I bet you would never know the answer. Boom, of course, it's Q&A, in our case, the Slido Q&A. And now another cheeky question for you. Is your company already doing leadership Q&A sessions? With or without Slido, we don't judge. But is that something you guys do regularly, or is it something that never happens, or just occasionally? Brilliant. I can see that the regular leadership Q&A people are in the lead, followed by occasionally and never. That is completely fine. Considering that you're here, you probably want to make some changes to your leadership Q&A or give some suggestions, maybe even to your leadership. We hope that we can provide you with some good arguments. So let's have a look. The risk of Q&A sessions, because of course, nothing ever is without costs or risks in that case. If you are a Q&A veteran and maybe you had some trouble in the past, we hear you. Q&As are definitely not risk-free. In fact, they require quite a lot of preparation in advance. We'll talk about that later. And they're also labor intensive. They require speakers and a facilitator and a Slido manager, ideally. Those are a lot of people. Also, high visibility in a live setting. When it's live, and there's limited control over what happens. And lastly, which might be challenging for some, leaders need to be calm and ready to pivot, which is admittedly not for everybody. But of course, Q&A leadership sessions also have high rewards. So we're talking about the higher engagement and the instant feedback. Usually when people feel like they're in a room together, and it doesn't matter whether it's a virtual room or not, there is more going on when they can interact with each other, when they actually receive feedback, and when they're able to give feedback. So that's a big one. Also, as mentioned, the connection with the team in real time, not only between team members, but also leads to team members. And leaders can address current issues in real time, and they don't need to send out, I don't know, barometers and surveys and wait for the results in 6 months. They can get their information now. In another research that our Slido research team conducted this June, we asked participants to rate Q&A in terms of the impact it can have on trust in the company. And we found that doing a Q&A session actually sends two strong messages to the team. First of all, that leaders are approaching and caring. And secondly, that leaders are willing to act on feedback and they're not trying to hide behind the problems. So we definitely recommend Q&A as a way of connecting with the team and building trust with the company. But there's always a catch. They need to be done well, and that can be quite challenging. So who better to ask about the impact of Q&A and the challenges and the benefits than two seasoned experts? It is time for our interview. Pali and Kati, are you ready?
Yes, we are.
Brilliant. Okay, in that case, let me stop the screen sharing so I can see you much better now. Wonderful. So, Pali and Kati, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? So what is your role and on which occasions do you get to participate in leadership Q&As?
Okay, so I can start. So my role is head of people. So I'm answering basically all the questions related to people, benefits, compensation, processes, even dogs actually, because previously I worked in a company which was dog friendly. We had around 100 dogs there. So when it came to dog behavior, I got questions on that as well during Q&A sessions.
That's brilliant, Kati. And so as a general manager, I'm responsible for overall direction and the strategy of Slido and enabling the teams to execute on it. And of course, making sure that we have a great working environment where people can grow and thrive, which, most of the time is about getting out of people's way so they can do the best job and, if needing, supporting them. And when it comes to leadership Q&As, we are running monthly company all-hands meeting. And within the meeting, we are sharing the business updates, product updates, team updates as well. And at the end, we are also opening the leadership Q&A where people can address and ask any topic that they are interested in for that time period.
Thank you. So you already explained a little bit how leadership meetings or how leadership Q&As in Slido usually work. So we have that monthly all hands with open Q&A for years now. And you guys are always ready to take any question that comes on. And there's usually a dedicated facilitator, often that's me, but not every company does Q&A with all employees and with the whole exec team. So what about your previous experience? Like, when was the first time that you were in such a situation? And also, were you nervous at all?
Well, for me, it was, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. It was also all hands, like monthly all hands in person. It was pre-COVID time, so it was even more, I would say, stressful because you could see the people face to face, all those hundreds. And yeah, I was nervous. I had a hard time really sleeping at all the night before, and I was sweating like crazy before the all hands and during the all hands. And for the full disclosure, I'm still nervous. Like, I will probably never be 100% comfortable, and relaxed when being there in front of the people.
Yeah, no, definitely. That I don't think this can change ever. But for me, as a leader, I joined the first leadership Q&A like 8 years ago. But as an exec member, it was 4 years ago in Slido. And actually, for that time, I received only 1 or 2 questions, but I was really preparing for them, actually writing the answer word to word to really be ready. And I also remember that, the Peter, our co-founder and still CEO at the time, was handling even like tough questions very calmly and in a great way. And I was talking to myself, wow, that's something I would like to really learn one day. So.
Q&A goals. I heard that my audio is not great right now. I'm going to fix it in just a second, but Never mind for now. So by now, you two obviously have extensive experience when it comes to participating in those Q&As and facing audience questions. And as we mentioned, we do have the moderator structuring and presenting the questions. And what we don't do ever is rewriting or blocking any questions from view, which, for example, you could do with the moderation feature. And in our all hands, we don't use it. All the questions are always visible immediately. And how do you feel this style of leadership Q&A shapes company culture? And how do you feel in general leadership Q&A shapes company culture?
If I can start, I think that there are not many things which show more how transparent the company culture actually is, right, in the practice, as this Q&A style is about a two-way communication. And it also, I think it shows that the leadership team is not afraid of any questions and that they do approach them with open mind. And I think it's very important, especially during some challenging times the company faces, and there are always some challenges, right? Sometimes it feels that it's one after another. And I think it's important to show within these times, to show that the leaders are there with people and they are there ready to be challenged, to explain things, to provide insight and context, but also to show empathy and understanding and show that they are, well, that they are humans as well, right? And I think a good example might be the Q&A sessions we ran in Slido just immediately after we announced the acquisition by Cisco 2 years ago. Because at that time there were hundreds of very good questions from people and very specific questions. And we didn't have most of the answers, but we really felt that now is the time to give people that space to ask those questions, share concerns. And although sometimes it felt like kind of like we don't know yet sessions, because to many questions, like we didn't know the answers yet, but still being there in front of the people and being there with them, I think it helped us to keep the close connection to the team, but also it helped us to ensure that people are okay and that they continue to have that platform, although we didn't have all the answers at the time.
Yeah, as Kati said, it's definitely about commitment to transparency and about empowering employees to open topics that are important to them and creating this safe space. And we actually hear from our customers that we are helping them to shape their culture. And we have like a multinational bank, a new CEO stepped in. She wanted to do like larger transformation, and she was also very intentional about culture. And they are using leadership Q&As like on the company level, on department level, making sure they open up and create this platform for inclusion and openness as such. And now actually from data standpoint, when COVID hit, which was I think the ultimate test of uncertainty, the year-over-year growth of our Slido events grew 5 times from 1 week to another. And we can also see it, when I'm joining QBRs with our clients, that we can see spikes in questions asked that can be mapped to challenging times of the company. The transformation programs, reorganization, restructurings. And I think you can see that people have these questions, right? And actually not running leadership Q&A or not addressing tough questions shapes culture as well. You just don't have control over it because people fill in blank spaces, right? It can just be done through gossips and rumors and assumptions based not on entirely full context.
Thank you so much. Actually, we do have an audience question that also asks the two of you for the hardest question you ever got. I'll ask you that in a minute. So if you want, you can already think about it. But there's a question in Q&A right now that I really like. Let me try to pull it up. By the way, can you hear me well? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay. So there is a question because we were talking about customer setup just now with Pali. And in this one, the person is asking, we have an agreement with our employees that we don't allow anonymity, but on the other hand, we don't moderate questions. How do we ensure we truly build trust and people are not afraid to ask, even with names? What do you guys think? So they don't allow anonymity, but they do
not use moderation. So any question comes through, but it has to be asked with a name.
Yeah, so I think, and we can see these setups in many of our customers, right? And it also ties to culture in the company and all the previous experiences and setups that you have. And I think already opening to coming questions is super important, and addressing even the tough ones is also super important, and even explaining the context why you are doing it. Because many times there is a decision that happened to get to this setup. And some of our customers are telling us that they want to have these setups because they want to understand where the question is coming from. And they want to know that because they want to follow up on the question, on the topic, and make sure they can do the things right. So I think even with these setups, it's always about communicating the why behind it and giving this context to the employees. And some of the employees might be more worried at the beginning, and we will be talking about it, I think, it's also important what happens after the all hands, right? If the leadership is actually taking these topics and, walking the talk, following up and making things better. And I think through these actions, you're actually building trust, right? You cannot build trust at one meeting and by a couple of words. There always has to be action behind the words.
Yeah, and if I might add, I think that it's connected to what Pali said. It's a journey, right? We cannot expect people just to out of the blue, like hundreds of them would ask, without the anonymity. So I think it might be also good, like if you see that people are asking, they are not afraid, that's great, right? And let's build on that. Maybe might be worth it just to check over time, right? Does it evolve? Do we see the numbers increased? And if not, let's discuss and maybe take it to the teams and let's leaders ask, like, within the kind of safe space of their team, like what prevents you to ask, right? What would help you to ask, and just take that feedback and build on it.
And I think something that we can also add is that in Slido, we always have the feedback survey after every Q&A session, and the feedback survey is always anonymous. So I feel like if you are not giving your employees a chance to ask questions anonymously and you have good reasons, that's fine. But what you could do is you could offer them an anonymous outlet that's a little bit different, where they can still give feedback, at least anonymously, and see if that changes anything. Like see if people are bolder there or they have serious concerns that they prefer to share anonymously, and then discuss if that's something that you would like to take into consideration. Brilliant. We have more cool questions. Let's see how we can weave them in. But first, let's keep going with our discussion, actually, because there is a similar question to this. So we were just talking about the impact of Q&A and how you run Q&A on company culture. And I think let's maybe just give a very quick summary of the risks and the rewards of this approach. And I think that Pali would like to start with a risk.
Yeah, I can definitely. And, I think the biggest risk is that some questions can come which are really tough, right? And you might not even have the best answers, right, to answer them at the time, or you cannot share all the details, right? But on the other hand, what is a big reward of the Q&A is that it provides you ability to build a context for others and for employees, so they can better understand what is happening in business and make better decisions in the end. So kind of you avoid gossiping. And what is also great is that you can learn about some real issues in the business, and the feedback loop is much shorter, and you don't have to wait for annual survey or barometer. So that's actually, we started a lot of initiatives in Slido based on the all hands meeting. And what I really love, and that's a kind of a personal reward, why I really believe it's great. I invest a lot of time into our Q&A session, is that actually your culture can be really demonstrated through the Q&A, right? So, for example, we had very challenging and tough Q&A when the investment rebalancing was happening in the Cisco last fiscal year, right? And we were even discussing if we should even hold the Q&A, because it was like very limited what we can share. at that meeting. And we pre-collected the questions to see if we can add value. We thought we can, but during the session, based on the question, we saw that people they would love to know even more than what we can share, right? And we try to give them the context, explain why this cannot happen, and in the end, there came a comment, not a question, that was actually showing gratitude for us to do it. So even though it's like difficult and challenging time for all of us, and it was like beautiful demonstration of our like weaker values and culture, and that's something kind of a beauty of itself, when kind of not being afraid to be vulnerable, also in front of the employees, and going this kind of extra mile, even when it's challenging for the leader itself.
Actually, I think Kati can take this one, because we have a wonderful question right now in Q&A where somebody says, like, many Q&A leaders, or many times leaders, are running away from Q&A sessions because they are scared of the difficult questions, and they might potentially even lay the blame on Slido. So how do you see that with the difficult or even the toxic questions, and how would you still argue that it's a good idea, in addition to what Pali just mentioned?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is that although we didn't answer the question is still out there, right? The fact that we don't answer it, it doesn't mean that it disappears. It will just be there. It will live its own life. And as Pali shared before, like, people will still, like, we will just reroute it to other channels. Do we want to do it, or do we just want to, approach it head on? And sometimes I think it's a good thing to say, because sometimes for the challenging questions, we don't even have the answers yet. It's good to say either that we don't have the answer yet and explain why. It's good to say that I need to find out more and I need more context. It's okay to not the answer, the question there. It's perfectly fine. And once you have the answer, you can follow up with people, right? So it also builds that trust. You promised that you will come back to them, and you came. And then I think it's also perfectly fine to acknowledge if you have hard time with answering the question. It might be because of the tone used, because it might be a bit passive aggressive. Sometimes we do see questions like that, or it might be because of the subject, because it is touching you somehow as well, because we are humans as well, right? And sometimes people might have these kind of like high expectations from us that we have the answers to everything, we know everything, although we say we don't know, we of course always know. It's okay to tell them we don't know. Yeah.
That brings us beautifully into the next question. So you guys already painted a few of the challenges. And of course, I know that you are preparing extensively. So we would like to know how you prepare for that. And then I think after that, we can go to the most difficult question. So let's go with, how do you personally prepare for a Q&A?
Well, I think for leadership Q&A, preparation is key. And so what we do in Slido is actually we open Q&A 4 days before the all hands meeting, and we encourage people to ask beforehand. And during those 4 days, I'm already monitoring for the questions, and we have dry run for the all hands 1 day before the event itself. And I really go through all the questions in advance, write down answers for difficult questions, and what is very important to me, that I consider this as a team sport category. So I involve other executive team members or other leaders to help me craft the answers, or ask them actually to answer some of them. And actually, it's something I do also like live during the all hands. We are using the internal channel, and I'm asking others to either respond to a question or ask them for a feedback and some thoughts on what I am planning to answer, even for the questions that are coming live. So yeah, definitely preparation.
Yeah, and it's the same for me. I need to be prepared, as all hands is still quite stressful thing for me. So I need to be prepared so I can breathe a bit better during the session. So I usually go through the questions. I monitor the questions as well up front, and I go through them the day before and prepare the answers. I prepare them in writing. It works for me better. And usually I rewrite them several times until I have the feeling that it's to the point and understandable. And yes, sometimes I also use that time to, you know, breathe in and breathe out before the session, because some of the questions might be asked in a rather passive-aggressive manner, and I need to be able to have the time to be able to raise above it, you know, to be frank.
That's brilliant, because we have a question exactly for that in Q&A right now. So somebody's asking, like, what if the question is actually good? It's a useful question. However, it's phrased poorly, right? Maybe a bit passive aggressive, maybe a bit rude. How do you, in the moment, like, imagine it comes up during Q&A, it bubbles up, it gets 50 upvotes, you have to take it on the spot. How do you rise above it, and how do you deal with it in the moment?
So what I would do is to address the question actually and address the fact that it's not consistent with our values, and help to build the context of how the question even should be asked. So it's phrased as we would expect, aligns to our values. But at the same time, I wouldn't forget to acknowledge the question itself and the concern behind it, and not assuming a bad intent. And if there is actually a question in advance, what I'm really trying to do is to walk in the shoes of a person asking the question. Because sometimes as a leader, when I read the question, I get defensive, right? I'm also a human being. The emotions are in me, right? I'm not a robot. And the first reaction might be defensive, but if I have time, I'm actually discussing the question with other leaders, with other people. And sometimes actually it really helped me to learn and actually see things from different angle and come up with much better response because of it. But yeah, if it's offensive question, toxic question, rude question, I wouldn't just let it go. I wouldn't delete it. I would use it as a learning opportunity. Although it's a huge challenge, and I have to say it's a stress, at least for me to receive such question. On the other hand, there might be actually a tough business question coming as well, and that's opportunity to explain the strategy, provide additional context, sometimes even to acknowledge that some things are out of our control, the restructuring, some budgeting questions, and sometimes you receive the elephant in the room question, and that's a question I believe we should provide the answer to people, because if we don't provide it, they will find their own answer, as we discussed before, and you have opportunity to be actually in control of with what is being shared.
Brilliant. So before we move on to the balance between what you can say and what you can't say, because that is also a situation where you guys find yourself quite a lot, there is this question: what was the hardest question you ever got in an all hands? Do you remember?
I don't remember the exact question, but I would say that for me, and it is connected to that kind of like sensitivity and what we can share. For me, it's always answers, because I'm in general, like, I'm open person, and I like to be as much open as possible, and I like to share if I know. But there are certain things and certain situations where I cannot. I know, but I cannot share. And this is, like, for me personally, the toughest thing, because I know why people ask. I know it's touching them. I know all that. But at that moment, I cannot. And there are good reasons for that. So I always also try to explain that, like, why I cannot share something, what's the context behind it. It's not only that I decided not to answer, so I will say it's confidential, right? For them to understand that inside, but still, these are probably the toughest questions for me.
What about you,
And
Pali?
for me, it would be similar. Like when we were having this Q&A session related to restructuring, there was limited amount of information we could share, and it was against our principle of transparency to some extent, but it was important at the same time, and it was tough, right? But I think even in this situation, when you cannot provide a direct answer, you can talk about the process, right? About how the things are being done and why is it so. And that still helps people to fill in those blank spaces and understand like what is happening. Because I think being silent is the worst, right? Like you don't know what is happening, and this uncertainty can be really, really, really bothering.
Thank you so much. So far, I feel like we're giving people quite nice answers. People are always commenting in the chat how they appreciate your answers. So you guys are doing a tremendous job. Before we go to the last question for the interview, but everybody's going to, you can still post your questions in Slido. We have a little bit of dedicated Q&A time after the official part as well. So that's at the end of the session. But I was asked by our team to let you know that in terms of what do I do if I don't want to seem passive aggressive, or if I'm not sure about how I phrased my question, in Slido, we actually now have an AI feature. It's called AI Boost. You can try it and you can see if our Slido AI is able to rephrase your question in a more neutral or more casual or more businessy tone. Try it if you want. It's fun. And with that, oh yeah, that's pretty cool stuff. And with that, we are going to our last question for the interview part only. And that is, we heard so much from you. We heard about the impact on company culture. What happens if you go to it, like the impact that your personal intent has, what you do in difficult situations, how you still rise above it. We appreciate you so much for everything that you shared with us. Now for the last part, what is your top tip for leaders who are starting with or maybe struggling with Q&A sessions?
I feel that I already shared it, but I will just repeat it because it's really the top tip that we as leaders, I think it applies general, not only in all hands, but it applies also to all hands, right? We don't have to have all the answers. So it's perfectly fine to say, I don't know, take it as an action, follow up. And that kind of like personal acknowledgement if something is difficult for me, because it makes me human, and providing that insight, like why, and sharing that kind of like my personal experience with people, I feel that it also helps to create that sense of being closer to people, and vice versa, people being closer to us as leaders, and build that kind of connection based on which we can further build trust.
And definitely, and I would pick one, and that's if you are starting with it, consider it as a learning experience. And there will be mistakes that might happen, and it might be tough in some times, but the vast majority of employees will appreciate you trying and opening, giving this platform, creating this safe space for them. And it's also learning about some struggles that you might not be even aware, and sometimes even ideas. We really received some really cool ideas also during our all hands through the Q&A. And as part of the learning, ask for feedback, ask employees, how did they like it? What, would they like more or appreciate more? And for example, last week we had actually pretty tough all hands at Slido, and I received one great feedback from actually our head of security, and it's definitely a learning that I will keep for the next all hands. So even after 4 years of doing all hands in Slido, there is still more to learn and to improve for the Q&As.
Thank you so much, both of you. We will see you again in just a few minutes. We're going to do the recap now, and then I'm excited to discuss more audience questions with you. Amazing. Whew. That was a lot of good stuff. Let's see how we can top this. Actually, we can't. We can just move on and do a little bit of a recap at this point. So let's go. We see that. Oops, sorry. Here I am. Okay, so we established that Q&A allows leaders to A, share information broadly, B, intentionally build relationships, and also a myriad of other things. These behaviors are directly and measurably connected to building trust in the company. And as somebody said in the chat, thank you so much for that comment, by the way, if you're scared of Q&A, you shouldn't do less, you should do more of it. And that's exactly it. I agree with that 100%. And to quote the legendary Sun Tzu, every battle is won before it's ever fought. And in that case, for Slido, it's actually every Q&A is won before it has started. So let's look at our best case practices for a smooth Q&A experience, shall we? So what do? Before the session, at least with Slido, there's a very important question to ask, but probably we also touched on it a little bit in general. So anonymous questions allowed, yes or no? How's it for you? Do you feel like if you were to make the decision, you would allow anonymous questions, or you would be like, oof, better not. Let's not open that box. What do you think? I see. So far we are team yes anonymous with a few people who are concerned. All right. I get you. But also in the beginning, we were talking about what we can do when it comes to engagement, right? And we actually know from client data that with anonymity, we see higher employee engagement. And there are also two more reasons for that. A, because it offers an easy access for introverts, and B, for everybody who may be simply embarrassed, even though their question might be perfectly reasonable and adequate to ask. The fact that there is anonymous Q&A might be an important layer of security that they need to fall back on so that they feel able to ask their questions. Also, it demonstrates leadership's ability to deal with anything while being open and approachable. Of course, as we already discussed as well, there are some tricky situations and it can always blow up in your face. That is the beauty and also the crux of a live setting. But there are a few tips that can help us navigate those tricky situations, and we will cover these now. So first of all, what we always recommend is to open Q&A in advance. There's a functionality in Slido that allows you to get the link to Slido, and you can share it then in a chat message like you can see in the screenshot. And with that, people can post their questions ahead of time, and you can already see what's being upvoted by the colleagues, and that allows you to identify sort of preemptively the hot topics. Now, what do you do with that? For the moderator or facilitator in this case, that is incredibly helpful to create a rough flow, and you'll be able to group similar questions so you can avoid duplicate and irrelevant, talking again about the same thing. And also it gives you the chance to reply to easy questions, right? Because if there's maybe something that is a good question, but it doesn't need to be discussed at the all hands, that's fair. You can just reply to it in writing and the person will see the answer and still be happy. Ooh, my slides are stuck. What's going on? All right, here we go. So what about the other ones, the speakers? For them, same thing. They have to review their questions and prepare accordingly. So speakers can already decide who takes which topic, and they can prepare their talking points as we just heard. Even after 7 and 8 years, Pali and Kati still prepare their talking points, their answers, they write them out. It doesn't get any easier. Maybe they just get a bit more routine. So you have to prepare all of these things, also your updates, numbers, etc., and write out and rehearse those answers. I'm having a little bit of trouble with my slides right now. I'm not sure what's going on. Aha, okay. So then here we are, we're in the fire. The discussion is going on. What happens next? The role of the facilitator is a pretty crucial one, and especially for leadership Q&A, we would actually always recommend to have a facilitator. So basically a person like me who can take care of the logistics and of the flow of the conversation so the speakers can focus on answering. So in an ideal setup, there is even a Slido person in the back end to support with answering questions in Slido and maybe labeling. We will touch on that in a second. But what does the facilitator do? So the facilitator monitors the incoming questions and tries to see if they can fit into the flow or not. So they also try to sort them in a logical way. They remind participants to upvote. Reminder here, everybody, to upvote your favorite questions in Q&A in a second when you have a chance to go through them. And They assign speakers to the questions. By the way, somebody was asking about our setup today. We will get into that in a second, but just so you know, we do have several colleagues helping, and here's a shout out to them behind the scenes. Thank you so much. We have one person who's monitoring chat, and we have one person who's monitoring Slido Q&A. All right, so the benefits of Slido. As a facilitator, it's incredibly important that you know your tech so you can take advantage of it. We have several helpful features to manage Slido Q&A, and we'll cover all of them in the webinar next week. I would just like you to know that we do have the moderation feature that we also touched upon already. There is such a thing as private replies, labels. You can close the Q&A in case you get overwhelmed with questions, but they're still visible. And we will discuss those scenarios, especially next week. So I would really recommend you to sign up for the webinar next week. Okay. So tips for speakers. You're there in the moment. The Q&A is happening. You get those questions. And then what? Of course, obvious, be prepared, have your updates and numbers ready. But sometimes you can't have them ready. Then what do? You need to be flexible and ready to pivot, which may be incredibly uncomfortable for some. Again, practice makes perfect. There's not really a good way to get around it. You just have to do it. Also, be empathetic, as Kati and Pali mentioned. It really helps, especially when you have a question that is maybe poorly phrased and comes across in a way that feels not great. Remembering that there is an actual person with a concern helps. And lastly, be as transparent and as honest as you can. So you made it through Q&A, you survived, everybody is all right. Then what? As Kati and Pali also mentioned, they actually discussed the Q&A with the other leaders, and they reviewed the questions in the Slido archive to see what was happening there. There's a cool feature in Slido that we have, which is called sentiment analysis, currently only available in English. Sentiment analysis basically lets you know how many positive, negative, or neutral questions were asked, so you can get an overall idea of the sentiment. And most importantly, you decide on the next steps together. So you sit down with your leadership team, you can go through the things, you can get feedback also from them, and you can also decide not everything that was a popular question needs to be an action point. Sometimes a question was just popular, and that's why it's really good to discuss those as well. Somebody was asking, but then what? So you did the Q&A and you have those action steps. How do you follow up? That's a brilliant question. Follow-ups are incredibly important to build accountability, and accountability is a major component of trust. It is really important to keep promises and to deliver those answers and follow-up. So you can do it, for example, in writing in a post like you see here, and you can actually answer Slido questions also in writing, especially when you have leftover questions. And you can just attach them there. You can close Q&A, and you can also attach a Slido feedback survey if you wish. But you also can choose different formats, right? You could have video updates or articles. You could share a question document. There are many different ways to do it. And when you have something that's very relevant also for the upcoming meeting, you could always choose to make that an agenda point of, for example, an upcoming all hands, or you could make it its own dedicated meeting and report back to the team in that way. All right, we have 10 minutes left. I know we have a full Q&A. Let's take a breather. Kali and Pati. Pati and Kali are coming. I knew that would happen. Kati and Pali are coming back on our stage. And I will give you a second to look at the most upvoted questions, everybody, and see if there's something that is especially relevant for you before we start. So, and I'm assuming that also you two had a look at the questions in the meantime. Okay. I see. All right. So there is a question about follow-ups. Let's just start with that one. Thank you so much. So the question about follow-ups. We allow anonymity, which means we get loads of questions, and we always get asked if we plan to respond to the unanswered ones, which is a massive job. How do you suggest we negotiate that? We have a rule for that in Slido. So how do we do it?
Yes, so we are doing it at Slido after every all hands. What we do is that we post answers for any question with more than 5 upvotes, and we share it through the a shared document on a SharePoint. And I think you can just adjust it, right? What is a reasonable level? So we are a team of up to 300 people, and you can set up also what is the threshold for you, and of course communicate it openly to the team. Right? If they are interested to know the answer, they should find the question, and basically you can choose a reasonable threshold for your organization. And
I think that
yeah, sorry, Kati.
Sorry, just wanted to follow up that maybe, because I can imagine that in organization with thousands and thousands of people, it might be really overwhelming. Maybe an idea of grouping some of the remaining questions might be also a good one. Yeah.
Yes. And also how we do it in Slido, it's a team sport. So it's not only one person providing all the answers, but really kind of splitting it through multiple leaders who are helping with the answers.
Perfect. So there are good case practices for how to follow up and what to follow up on. Give me a second. This is a tech question. This is, okay. I maybe have an answer for this one. So how do we handle dozens and hundreds of questions coming in with so many votes when employees use multiple devices and browsers for voting up? Okay, this is tricky. So there is something that we can recommend you, I think, in terms of Slido setup. I'm thinking of SSO. Maybe, Pali, would you like to mention that?
Yes. So within companies, you can turn on a single sign-on for participants. That means that every participant will need to log in with your company credentials. And this is actually limiting these abilities to use different sessions and different browsers to adjust the number of votes. At the same time, participants can still vote anonymously. So it's not like pushing them to leave the name. So you can also keep this element of the Q&A session. But still, like if you see this behavior, again, like trying to walking in the shoes of a person, like why is the person doing it, and addressing it, right? That we understand that you really care about the questions. Let's not misuse the solution we have to have this platform, and kind of give this context, right? Like why it is important to keep the Q&A kind of clear of this behavior, and provide chance also for the others to address their questions. But at the same time, probably it's a topic that is very dear to that employee, right? To use this behavior. So also kind of to look, behind this and see what is the content of the question itself, and acknowledge the question.
Also, we are going to expand on that in the webinar next week, but there are a few things that you can also do during the session. So for example, what you could do is you could start moderation during the session. You could let people know that you do that to try and filter out duplicates, and to basically stop the influx a little bit. And if worst case scenario, you can even say we are taking questions until that and that time. Then we're closing Q&A. Questions are still visible, you can still upload them, but it's not possible anymore to post anything new. So if you feel really overrun, there are more technical features in Slido that you can use to help yourself in such a situation. Okay, that is a tech question. That is okay. So are those strategies different for new leaders compared to seasoned leaders? Would you give different advice to new leaders than what we just discussed? Maybe Kati?
I
Yeah,
probably
Kati.
wouldn't. I think that it's always the same, no matter how experienced you are. And as you said, like I wouldn't probably consider myself as a seasoned leader, but I would consider myself experienced, and still I have the same routine for many years, and it really helps me. Maybe one slightly different thing for seasoned leaders would be to always like be mindful of the context of the company and environment, because especially with many experiences from the past, like it might be quicker for us to kind of get into the context of from somewhere in the past, which doesn't have to be relevant for the situation right here and now in this company, you know, in this scenario, just to be mindful of that.
Pali is sort of a fake new leader because he only recently started to be the GM of Slido. So did that change anything for you?
No, not really. I think maybe for like seasoned leaders with Slido, I would have some additional tips. One thing is that you can actually shape what questions come to the Q&A, right? And you can do it by actually using polling even before the session, right? So we have an all hands meeting before that. If I am presenting a new strategy, I'm asking the team, you know, how is resonating with them. If we are doing some major change, you can ask about the emotions of the team. And, you know, you can encourage the team, you know, who are worried or uncertain to actually use the chance to ask the question in the Q&A. And, you know, you kind of frame the topics that people can think about and kind of reflect the concerns in the Q&A, which is great for me because I can actually understand why some people are hesitant about certain topics that I was presenting before. And it can uncover me, you know, like, was I missing something when I was communicating it, or is there some actually real concern I need to think of? So also kind of combining polling and Q&A, which might be again some like additional level of like how to use platform like Slido, but most of the things are very similar. And maybe just one thing to add, even for experienced leader who is using tool like Slido for a long time, the AMA session or the Q&A session might be different with what is happening in the company. Right? As we were saying, with the challenging times, actually more tough questions might come, and it might be new situation even for the kind of seasoned leader. So this kind of element of learning, I think it's just constant.
Thank you so much. We are almost at the hour. I have already started the feedback survey. So for anybody who needs to drop now, please leave us your feedback before you do. We were so happy to have you. We are going to look at the last question. By the way, we do have a few questions here that are tech related. We are going to answer them in writing and then attach the link to the email, the output email, so you can read up on those later. But there was one that I really liked, and it has something to do with psychological safety and trust as well. So what do you do if a rude question discourages the audience and not only the person answering? So what if that like sends a shockwave through everybody and then everybody's like, oh, what's going on?
I would probably acknowledge it, the fact that what it did and what effect it has, so that people understand that we see it as well, right? And probably, and it depends on the context and the situation, but I would think about how can I help to create that kind of like safe space again for people. And I think that it starts with really acknowledging that and calling out, and you will use the language and tone which is appropriate for the situation, right, to help to build that safe space again.
Thank you so much. And it is time. So again, thanks for everybody who joined today. Thank you so much, Kati and Pali, for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us, and also for being so open and honest about how hard it can be. That was great. And remember to sign up for the tech webinar if that's interesting. And good luck with your Q&As in your companies.